You know who's a smart guy when he's not infecting people with microchips through vaccines or whatever? Bill Gates. At this point, it's kind of tough to trust any government information, so it always helps to hear from one of the smartest, most capable people in the entire world who's been warning us about pandemics forever. And Wired had a nice interview with him lately where he said most US tests are completely garbage, and he's talking about those CCPV tests, of course. But I feel like Billy G could give us a good update about where things are and where they're headed and what it means for the market. And of course, regardless of what's happening in the market, you need a strategy that can deal with anything. And that's what we talk about in this free training. There's a link to it in this video and down below in the description and comments. Definitely check it out if you haven't already, because it is key to have a strategy like this in your corner during volatile markets. So as I said, Billy G has been warning us about a global pandemic for years, but now that it's happened as he predicted, is he disappointed with the performance of the United States? Yes, he is. So he talks about 3 time periods. The first was from 2015 until this pandemic hit. And what we should have been doing during that time is build up diagnostic, therapeutic, and vaccine platforms. And we should have had simulations going to understand what the key steps were. And if we did all that prep, then we would have been much better off today. But of course, no one was listening to Billy G, so no one did it. Then the second part of this was during the first few months of the pandemic. And for some reason, the US actually made it harder for commercial testing companies to get their tests approved. The CDC, as you remember, they barely had any tests, and they didn't even work at first. And they weren't letting people get tested either. Travel ban was too late, and it was too narrow to actually do anything. Then that last period after the first few months of the virus is when we eventually figured out about masks. And leadership was important during that time, which, we barely have. So Billy G is disappointed, but is he surprised? A little bit, because the smartest people in epidemiology in the world are at the CDC. So you would expect them to do better, and you would actually expect them to be the face of this pandemic, not the White House or Anthony Fauci. But they haven't, and they should have been, because they're the guys who are trained to communicate to the masses and not make them panic, but still have them take things seriously. But they've been pretty much muzzled since the beginning of this whole thing. Even when Billy G tried to call the CDC, they told him to talk to the White House. And nowadays they're saying, hey, we're doing a great job here. We don't need to talk to you. So Billy G, he always has some solutions. So even for the simplest things, which would greatly improve the system, they feel that if they took those things on and listened to his suggestions, well, then they'd be admitting that they did something wrong. Now, as you can imagine, these institutions, the government, the CDC, everybody else, are not too fallible, because that's not something that works out in politics, does it? In politics, you just cover everything up and never admit a mistake ever. And that type of thinking is why things got so bad. But what is it? Is it the agencies that screwed up, or was it the leadership at the top, the White House? According to Billy G, the White House is the problem. They didn't allow the CDC to do its job after March. So the variance between the US and other countries, why we're doing so bad during this pandemic, isn't because of that first period where we should have done all those simulations and stuff. Really, it's because of those subsequent periods where the messaging was all messed up, still is. And we're talking messaging about when everything should open up, whether we should be wearing masks, things like that. And that's not the CDC's fault. They're the ones who said not to open back up, and they said the leadership needs to be a model of face mask usage, which Trump is not. So they've tried to do a good job, but we haven't gotten the benefit of it. Now, Billy G is optimistic, even though all this damage has been done economically, trillions and trillions of dollars. But the innovation pipeline has been impressive with the diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines on the way. So Billy G thinks that in the developed world, the rich world, we should be able to end this thing by 2021. And for the world at large, by the end of 2022, which is still a long time from now, it feels like, but it's better than it being 5 years. Now, he said even though we'll be able to end these things, it's going to take us years beyond that to get back to where we were at the start of 2020, because we've just lost so much. It's not a world war that we're facing, but it's that order of magnitude as a negative shock to the system. So it's pretty bad. But hey, the stock market doesn't feel it, right? We just paper over it, print that money. So as far as vaccines that he's investing in, he's like these RNA vaccines from Moderna, Pfizer, CureVac. But the issue with those is that they're slow to manufacture and they're hard to scale up. So if they do work out, it's just going to work out for the rich countries. But then to get solutions out to everybody else, you got to look at like a Johnson & Johnson. Good news though is that from the phase 1 data that they've been seeing, it looks like this disease is very preventable with the vaccine. Now, of course, there's still more things to figure out, like how long the vaccine lasts, how it works with elderly people, but they think that that's going to go quite well. Now, of course, there is some concern that these vaccines are going to get rushed out and they're going to be approved before they're actually safe and effective. They're not going to go through the whole process. Now, in the US, at least, the FDA has been pretty strict, even though they've been facing so much pressure. China and Russia, well, that's another story, because they don't mind just testing it on their people. Whoever dies, dies, and then they'll iterate from there. What's the problem, man? But the irony here here, according to Billy G, is that the president is a vaccine skeptic. Every meeting he has with him, he's like, hey, I don't know about vaccines, and you have to meet with this guy, Robert Kennedy Jr., who hates vaccines and spreads crazy stuff about them. And this is the Trumpish plausible deniability that always happens. It's a great technique. I've started using it myself. No, not really, but maybe one day. But Kenny Jr. was the guy talking about Billy G using those vaccines to implant chips into people. And he's like, yeah, him, Roger Stone, Laura Ingraham, they do it in the kind of the way where they say, yeah, I've heard a lot of people say X, Y, and Z. That's the plausible deniability. Just like Trump saying here, I don't know much about vaccines. Go talk to this guy, who we all know how that guy feels about it. Even when they have meetings with the government, Billy will be like, hey, wait a minute, that's not real data. What you guys are saying isn't true. And they'll come back and say, look, Trump told you you have to sit and listen, so just shut up and listen anyway. So there's a lot of BS politics going on as usual, which is the worst thing you can have in a pandemic like right now. As far as stuff that's looking like it's working, remdesivir is one of those. I think I said that right, maybe not. But the trials that they've been conducting in the US have been super chaotic, which is messing up the results. So while the potential of this drug could be pretty big, it's getting clouded by the way things are getting done. Apart from that, it looks like antivirals are 2 to 3 months away and antibodies are 2 to 3 months away as well. We've had about a factor of 2 improvement in hospital outcomes already, and that's just with these drugs like remdesivir. The new stuff coming out will help build on those results. One of the things Billy G has pushed through in this pandemic is a better test. So when the test first came out, they would have to stick that swab all the way in the back of your nose, which hurts and makes you sneeze on a healthy worker. So Gates came in and he showed the quality of the results can be equivalent if you just put a self-test in the tip of your nose, which from my friends who have gotten tests recently, I heard it actually did change now. They don't shove it all the way in there. Much nicer experience. Thanks, Billy G. And this is where he says that a majority of all these US tests are complete garbage. They're just wasted because they don't get it back to people quick enough. And that's a result of the system that's screwed up because these companies are getting reimbursed regardless of when they get that test back to the person. So they're making ridiculous money. So they have no incentive to actually get these tests out fast. What should happen is that this reimbursement system should pay a little bit extra for a 24-hour turnaround, pay the normal fee for 48 hours, and then pay nothing if it isn't done by then. That's how you fix this testing problem. Then these companies will be motivated to actually do it properly. And why don't we just do that? Well, when you tell the federal government to change it, they say, hey, as far as we can tell, we're doing just a great, amazing job. But here we are in August, and we're the only country in the world where we waste the most money on tests. So stupid. Now, Wired asks him next, as someone who built your life on science and logic, I'm curious what you think when you see so many people signing on to this anti-science view of the world. All these anti-vaxxers, no maskers, all these guys. So Gates says that the irony is that it's digital social media that's allowing this kind of titillating, over simplistic explanation of, okay, there's just an evil person and that explains all of this. And I don't know if you guys saw that recent John Oliver episode on conspiracy theories, but one of the main factors that you need is an event that had huge effects that people can't comprehend being caused by something super simple. So they want some type of conspiracy theory that again gets boiled down to a simple point in the end, which is, hey, this is the evil guy behind all of it, because people can't comprehend something so big happening just because of random chance. Those people should not be in the stock market. And Billy G brings up that when those posts and those messages are all encrypted, which they are on a lot of these platforms, there's no way to really slow it down. And he personally believes the government should not allow these types of lies or fraud, or even illicit photos of children. Those shouldn't be hidden with encryption like WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger, which means no messages should. And that's interesting because a lot of these tech guys, they want to encrypt everything. So Mark Zuckerberg and Billy G, they're friends, but they disagree on the trade-offs involved with this encryption. Gates says that the lies are so titillating you have to be able to see them and at least slow them down. And Bill Gates is rightfully getting annoyed when he gives literally tens of billions for vaccines to save lives, and then people turn around and say, no, they're just trying to make money and they're trying to end lives. It's a wild inversion of what Bill Gates goes for, what his values are and what his track record is. I'm interested to hear what you guys think about encryption, because on the one hand, yeah, you don't want these conspiracy theories spreading. They're very harmful, and there's other terrible things that go on in messages too. Terrorism, child trafficking, terrible things. So if they weren't encrypted and the government had access, well, they could stop a lot of this. But on the other hand, if the government has access to everything and they can control it and they could stop the spread of certain ideas, well then how close are you to the CCP at that point? Because they control everything. And what's the differentiating line between a conspiracy and the truth? So even when the government came out in the beginning of this pandemic and they said, hey, masks don't help at all, well, there was certain people saying, yes, masks absolutely do help, don't listen to the government and the CDC. Now, if the government had power over all our messaging, well, the fact that masks work, would that be kind of a conspiracy theory? And would they block those messages? So So in that sense, if the government has control, they could stop the spread of true things when they're actually lying. So I see both sides of it, but I don't really have an answer. I'd be interested to see what you think in the comments. And it's funny because when it comes to social media, Bill Gates, he's still the technology advisor to Microsoft, and they're getting into social media with TikTok. And Billy G said, yes, my critique of dance moves will be fantastically value added for them. But he said yes. But of course, that's a joke. But he calls the whole thing a poison chalice, because being in social media is no simple game, just like this encryption issue. As I just said, the two sides have strong arguments. And the other big issue they're going to have when they get into this social media business is, do they control the content on their platform? That's still a gray area, and we just talked about that in the previous video with Amazon and Google and Facebook. Now, Billy G does think that the game being more competitive with Microsoft getting in is probably a good thing, which is why it was confusing to him to have Trump kill off the only competitor, so that it's not just Facebook dominating. Now, the reason I like TikTok getting cut off and WeChat as well is because it is a hit to the CCP. Less data for them to collect, and Trump allowing a US company to buy TikTok should keep that competition in the social media space. So I'm not sure what Billy G means there, but I know a lot of people have been bringing up the point that everything Trump is doing is just political. Like, the only reason he's doing all this stuff against the CCP is to just paint a target on an enemy so that there's less attention on him and his screw ups. Now, that's something I don't disagree with, but these same people refuse to support anything that Trump is doing in that area because they're so anti-Trump. That I don't understand. Their argument is that the intention of why Trump is doing things is more important than the result itself, which I disagree with. To me, even if Trump is misguided and why he's going after the CCP still needs to be put in their place. So I'd be a bit more flexible on how we get there as long as we are getting there. Another thing that stops these people is that going against the CCP is like siding with Trump, so they can't handle it. But really, it's okay if you hate Trump and you also hate the CCP and you're aligned in some things. Half the country voted for this guy, right? Is he so bad that there's absolutely nothing that you could agree on? If he likes cheeseburgers, are you gonna hate cheeseburgers from now on? That's why it's so key to be independent when it comes to all these things. The minute you put a blanket statement on everything and say, hey, I identify with this group and that means I hate all these things without critically thinking about each individual thing or each individual idea, just going with the identity group that you put yourself in, well, that just makes you dumber. You're gonna make worse decisions. We actually wrote an article about that at Macro Ops, not specifically for politics, but in anything, even in the stock market. If you hold on to certain opinions very strongly and refuse to change, well, then you're gonna get rolled over by the market. Same thing happens in life. Gotta be able to think for yourself. It's super important. Would love to hear your thoughts about all this stuff down below in the comments. Definitely say something. And if you haven't already, make sure you check out our free training. It's gonna show you the strategy that myself and all our Fallible members use. Very important in a super complex market to have a strategy that is simple and effective. There's a link in this video and down below in the description and comments. Definitely check it out. And if you like this video, make sure you subscribe for more. We got them every week, so subscribe and I'll see you in the next one. Stay fallible out there. Bye.